Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host Gershwan, and today we're going to be talking about the citizens and planets of the Imperium. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions, please comment down below. Don't forget to hit the little bell notification icon to stay updated. And if you enjoy our content, thank our patrons on Patreon. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with that said, let's get into the overview of the Imperial planet and Imperial citizens. A fortress world is a type of planet within the Imperium of Man that serves as a bastion of the Imperium's defense against some constant and persistent threat to Imperial space. These worlds are extremely well defended, usually with large numbers of Imperial Guard regiments and Imperial Navy assets, and their populations and economies are wholly geared towards meeting the demand of Imperial defense. Fortress worlds are uncommon but necessary planets. They are established to act as military strongholds, staging points, and physical deterrents. Worlds like these are as much of a roadblock as they are bastions. They are often established on habitable planets and built up for warfare. Linked together, they are able to form blockades used to stop the enemy and prevent them from spreading out into the Imperium. Life on a fortress world is steeped in military discipline and doctrines. From the moment the citizen wakes up until they go to sleep, they train and operate as a military unit. All citizens of fortress worlds prepare for the day they are called upon to push back the darkness that sits beyond their walls. Cities are giant fortresses studded with artillery weapons, and industry is focused almost exclusively on manufacturing machines for war. Those old enough to enlist in the Imperial Guard or Planetary Defense Force are often required to do so, and even those too young to infirm find ways to serve. It's not uncommon to have a whole generation of family in service to the Imperium at one time, and many such Imperial Guard regiments boast a rich and proud history. Soldiers from fortress worlds have been trained and raised to serve in war, and by the time they reach maturity, they are well versed in the art of war and the doctrines of the Tactica Imperialis. Each has been long trained to destroy the enemies of the Imperium, particularly those whose threat forced their world to be fortified in the first place. Fortress worlders are disciplined, honorable, loyal, and with the highest regard for integrity, and each is already a proficient combatant long before they are taken to serve in the Imperial Guard. The most famous fortress world in the Imperium is Cadia, which defends the Cadian Gate, the only stable passage through the warp from the Eye of Terror into open Imperial space, from the constant assault of the forces of chaos. A forbidden world, also called a quarantine world, is a planet that has been declared off limits to contact with Imperial citizens by the government of the Imperium of Man, usually by the express order of the Inquisition. The existence of forbidden worlds is rarely made obvious to Imperial citizens, but there are many of them throughout the Imperial space. Travel to these worlds is forbidden except for the most well-informed and heavily armed expeditions, and even then, only with a very good reason. Death worlds, alien empires, or planets where the creatures of the warp have broken through into real space are all examples of quarantine worlds, as are planets racked with plague. Some worlds are quarantined because no one can fathom the origins of what has been found there, be it mysterious artifacts or ancient alien cities. It is thought better to live in ignorance of what lies on such worlds than risk it becoming a threat. Other worlds are quarantined because every Imperial expeditionary mission there has failed to return. Planets are often quarantined by the pronouncement of the Inquisition, especially if they have uncovered some warp taint or Xenos infestation that cannot be cleansed. Many forbidden worlds possess great resources that would extremely bring value to the Imperium if they were properly explored and exploited, but there are enough tales of ancient horrors awoken on sinister alien worlds that few adepts would try to defy a planetary quarantine, particularly one backed by the inquisitorial warrant. Quarantine worlds are marked as forbidden for visitation, settlement, or contact of any kind. Some might be seemingly benign spheres, others might be foreboding rocks, but the Imperium has determined there is some terrible threat that outweighs any possible usefulness they might contain. Once the edict is given, the Imperial Navy provides the military and defense systems the situation requires. From message buoys at the outskirts of the system to patrolling ships and orbiting weapon platforms, no unauthorized craft is allowed anywhere near the space, and any found are generally destroyed without question. In case of extreme risk to the sector, the human population is often annihilated to prevent any potential escape. Regardless of whether anyone survives this destruction, no one is allowed to set foot on those planets without proper authorization. To be discovered breaking a rite of quarantine is a death sentence. Details of life on a quarantine world are scarce, as most who could provide them are trapped on the surface or captured and likely put to immediate death. Tales whisper of worlds covered with psychic storms that can burn sanity like firewood, or where ethereal remnants of dead races still stalk the ruins of once grand temples, or simply where events occurred so terrible that the Imperium insists they remain secret forever. Populations might vary from teeming masses of unknowing tainted with a warp-based plague, to the wretched survivors of an alien invasion deemed too spiritually contaminated to be allowed outside. Though inquisitors often seek to interrogate such individuals for information about the world they came from and how they were able to escape from it, most captains readily dispose of them through an air gate should any official investigation draw near their ship. On some quarantine worlds, the remaining inhabitants are perhaps unaware of their status, knowing only that travel from their planet has been dormant for long generations, and such is the way the Emperor has decreed it. On others, where the populace knows of their fate, many lose hope quickly and sacrifice themselves in an attempt to thwart any spread of the threat. A few, however, may be motivated to find a way to beat the odds and counterattack the threat, whether it is killing the creature or pathogen or containing and eradicating warp contamination. There are no records of any world ever being released from quarantine, though many planets have petitioned for generations, claiming that they have freed themselves from any taint. Escape from a quarantine world, however, is very different. Leaving under one's own power is usually met with death at the same hand of gunners or interceptor pilots. Any travel detected leaving the planet's surface is hailed once and then eliminated. Station forces must conduct reconnaissance themselves, whether by scans from orbit or aerospace drones, and aircraft doing more in-depth sensor sweeps, and visual checks from within the atmosphere. It is in these instances that the local population may attempt to commandeer or stow away aboard these craft, seeking a one-time ticket to a larger orbiting ship where they can hopefully disappear within the ship's crew. People from worlds marked for quarantine face immeasurable odds in getting off planet and staying free, whether the individual lived there at the time of the event, was born afterwards, or has been to the surface liberating inhabitants or scavenging for ancient relics. Anyone who has been past the restriction point of the edict lives on borrowed time. Depending on the nature of the quarantine and the amount of ordnance preventing departure, those who flee risk capture and execution, and therefore must remain on the run. It is no surprise that they seldom ally themselves with any singular group for too long. Anyone can come from a quarantine world, for it is the nature of the world or the accident that determined the need for enforced segregation, not the people. Adeptus Mechanicus research stations, Agri-worlds, Hive-worlds, all of these have been victim of such accidents, condemning their inhabitants to live on gradual declines and eventual extinction. Those who survive and escape are some of the most versatile and resourceful people in the galaxy. They are also some of the least trusting and secretive, relying on themselves and often willing to strand comrades in order to stay one step ahead of the authorities. In the rarest of circumstances, the left hand of the Emperor finds these individuals and offers them a chance to stop running in exchange for their service. It is a very brave or very foolish person who refuses such an offer. Another residency where it would be less common to find yourself in is a research station. Imperial research stations are listed in the classification system of Imperial worlds, but are not worlds themselves. Some are based in orbit around the planet or on an asteroid, or on the surface of a planet such as a dead world or a death world. The Imperium and the Adeptus Mechanicus have many research stations across the stars to collect data in an often vain attempt to better control mankind's surroundings. The aim of such stations vary, with researchers studying planetary storm patterns, dissecting captured Xenos corpses, charting the stability of warp entry locations, or probing the remains of ancient civilizations. Research stations provide a stable base of operations to tech priests, scribes, adepts, servitors, and the small army sometimes necessary to support them in these often remote locations. Most researchers never live to see any conclusive results. Once committed to a station, few ever leave, and their tasks are passed on through generation without end. Useful results might never occur, or be lost in the impossible depths of imperial bureaucracy. But sometimes, glimmers do emerge and catch the eve of those looking for aid in the defense of mankind. Research stations are often found throughout the Imperium, in almost every situation, locale, or environment. Though many are in otherwise inhabitable planets, they are invariably isolated or secluded from general populations, making contact only to restock supplies or take on replacement staff. Most social interactions at any given facility are bound with scripted and taught language, the original meaning of which might be long lost. Control and predictability governs daily life on a research station, which can include extended families of expert fabricators who spin and polish massive crystalline lenses, or of brute haulers transferring the vats of ink necessary to transcribe daily findings. All understand that the security and the progress of the station's research program requires very strict scheduling to ensure optimal results. Time not spent on duty, such as meals or sleep, is measured and monitored. Sites like these are similar to manufactorums and forges in that the master timetable dictates every quality of life. While this can vary considerably, there is generally one constant. Regardless of individuals' wants and needs, their research always takes priority over them. Whatever the project is, everyone from the lead tech priest and the administrator down to the lowliest scribe and indentured laborer believes that their efforts contribute to the continual greatness of the Imperium. They believe this despite the fact that, unknown to most working on them, some stations dance precariously on the thin line between sanctioned research and abominable tech heresy. Though tech priests and scholars are often the core of these stations, there are also guards, codifiers, and support staff who make sure that the station as a whole runs smoothly. Regardless of what person role within the strata of the facility, virtually everyone claims understanding of the basic nature of the work. This comprehension is often poor at best. Information is commonly mangled and distorted, not only from a generation to a generation, but also from one research assignment to the next. Instilled in all of them is a drive to make sure that the work continues. They are all in a perpetual state of analysis regarding their task, and the time it takes to accomplish them. As a result, they are incredibly focused and punctual, and largely dispassionate about anything except their own specific assignments. This segmentation of tasks often makes the project as a whole undecipherable, as those who begin the experiment are often long dead, and the purpose of the research has either been diffused or lost entirely. In its stead is a misplaced reverence for the hypothesis outcome, and researchers eliminate anything that contradicts the desired results, regardless of what actually is found. While the Machine Cult and the Imperial Guard both have significant numbers on many stations, other agencies provide staff and also draw personnel from them. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica operates many facilities to study the tides of warp, and no matter the type of research, the massive transcription and data sorting required can lead many to the position within the Adeptus Administratum. The dark and remote locations, as well as some of the highly dangerous research, also generate the deformed and shunned mutants. Some of these might in turn become subjects for research, a future only slightly better than the Torch. A penal world is a class of imperial world that functions as a worldwide military prison planet. This world's population consists entirely of criminals from hundreds of different planets. This type of world tends to be a barren planet that has few other uses and little, if any, indigenous population. Military formations are often raised from amongst the prison population as necessary, to serve as penal legion troops with Imperial Guard regiments. There, they might earn redemption through the term of service, which is for life. In the Imperium, crime is widespread enough that entire worlds are given over to incarcerating the dirt of society. On these penal worlds live the criminals of the Imperium, the guards that keep them there, and the luckless denizens unfortunate enough to have been born there. Penal worlds are more often than not barely inhabitable planets. Here the criminals labor and toil at various menial tasks while serving out their sentences, and only a few parole out. On some worlds, the worst criminals, those whose crimes aren't severe enough to warrant death, might be segregated from the rest, but this practice varies from world to world. Thus, murderers and rapists might mix with petty thieves and conmen. From this melting pot comes a brutal society, where survival comes only when one forgets morality and is willing to do whatever is necessary to make it to the next day. Where most world classifications stem from the type of terrain or life form found there, penal colonies are defined by strict imperial law. In every expansion, there are looters, murderers, and thieves who appear in its wake. The most violent or persistent offenders, if not granted summary execution at the time of apprehension, may be shipped off world to facilities designed to house them permanently. These purgatories made real are often ruined worlds left forgotten due to the lack of strategic importance or natural resources. Buildings are repurposed to accommodate massive numbers of inmates. The automated defenses are brought in to keep new residents in line. It is here that the lawbreakers are left to wither and die, though some survive to escape their sentence and fight for the Emperor on other fronts. Within the Calyx sector, inmates sentenced to penal worlds are marked with barcode tattoos that are typically placed on their neck, forehead, or other easily spotted areas of the body. Here, many inmates die of disease, starvation, infection, the environment, the escape attempt, an encounter with a brutal guard, or one of 100 other horrible things. Inmates are sentenced far away from their homeworlds, and most never see the world again. Some feel that those who are executed are the true lucky ones, for those who are sentenced to penal worlds are sent to hellish places where death is slow in coming. The only denizens that have any real freedom whatsoever are the warden and his guards. On many penal worlds, the planetary governor is also the prison's warden, and his authority is absolute. The warden and his guards often brutalize the inmate population, adding to their considerable misery and mortality. The populace tends to be hardened, ruthless, shifty, and untrustworthy. However, they can also be resourceful and possess a low cunning. They are haunted individuals who are witnesses to the kinds of atrocities most will never see. Life on many penal colonies is extremely regimented and heavily monitored. Daily menial labor maintaining the grounds, or more rarely, mining or extracting resources, is designed to tax even the hardiest individual's energy level, thereby reducing the incidences of violent encounters. Food is largely bland and heavily processed to inhibit muscle growth and dull the senses. Constant lockdown when not working or eating all but eliminates the ability to hope for a better day. These calculated practices break the wills of the inmates, but even with all of that working against them, human nature knows no limit to its baser instincts. When the demand for expendable soldiers is highest, Lord Generals send word back along the worlds they have conquered and request additional troops from all planets capable of sending them. Penal colonies are often able to send viable troops, who seek little more than a final taste of freedom and redemption in service to the Golden Throne. Founding tithes for war efforts are rare on these planets, for such penal legions are difficult to control, but the flood of inmates continually feeds the insatiable, unending imperial war machine on fronts across the galaxy. While this represents the majority of these colonies, others are so far removed from the rest of the Imperium that they are merely dumping grounds for what the sector or subsector governments consider human wastes. On these worlds, transport fleets often arrive in the system covered with one-way drop pods filled with convicts. Once in orbit, they fire off all the pods and then depart for a hasty transition back to the warp, leaving the accused to fend for themselves. On some of these worlds, a single established bastion provides updates or provides the basis for rounding up and honoring a founding tithe. In others, those who survive from their own tribal groupings and struggle to exist with the remains of their pods and any gear they were given. Those hailing from a penal colony fall mostly into one of two camps, either inmates or their progeny. A few others come from the ranks of guards and wardens who oversee these wretches. Regardless of which group they fall into, those living on a penal world develop survival strategies to protect themselves from the horrors around them. Many prisoners band together in gangs to provide support, protection, and strength. Some rely on intimidation or reputation to keep potential threats at bay. Those unable to cope find their way to their graves, or end up more deeply imprisoned by the servitude to a fellow inmate. The few able to survive and emerge from this environment stronger and more defined are often the kind needed by both Inquisitors and the Imperial Guard. Individuals who have skills and talent outside of the norm are often noticed by those with a keen eye for such abilities. Wardens are tasked with readying prison recruits for duty in penal legions as required. At times, an Inquisitor might seek out those with the capacity to move in the world of shadows and depravity, and there are few better places to find those with these resolves and abilities other than in a prison. Working for an Inquisitor brings significantly more freedom, but indefinitely more danger than even the highest terminal nature of their service in the Imperial Guard. Still, very few reject an offer made by someone who can make a warden cower. Penal colonies hold all kinds of criminals, and therefore they also see all kinds of talents. While most doomed to such a world are rough, tough, or insane killers, some inmates are gifted thinkers, skilled processors, rousing orators, or budding technomats who are captured and incarcerated for activities that local rulers deem heretical or revolutionary. Once imprisoned with others of their kind, they might hone their skills or develop new ones. If ever unleashed upon the Imperium, most are eager to share their new abilities with unsuspecting enemies on the direction of their inquisitorial master. In direct contrast to penal worlds, another world that a civilian of the Imperium may find himself in is a shrine world. A shrine world of the Imperium of Man is dominated by the religion of the Imperial cult and the active devotion to the God Emperor of mankind. It may be that these places saw the birth of a famous Imperial saint, or former battlegrounds for a particular important war in the Imperium's history. Often studded with cathedrals, temples, and shrines spread across the globe to the Emperor and his saints. These worlds are frequently directly controlled by the ecclesiarchy and may form training grounds for members of the Adeptus Ministorum and the Adeptus Sororitas. A shrine world can also be considered to belong to other categories of worlds. For example, Hagia is also classified as an Agri-world, while Herodor is also a Hive world. All shrine worlds will have a strong relationship with the Imperial Saint connected to the planet in question, such as being the world of his birth or death, or the site of a major miracle the saint was responsible for performing in the name of the Emperor. Religious grace permeates every part of the shrine world. the very spirit of the culture of the imperial creed embodied by the world itself and its citizens which embrace his divine worship. Shrine worlders live their lives with the strength of the emperor in their hearts and expose to his words in every aspect of their lives. It is one thing to acknowledge the might of the emperor, as all imperial citizens must, but quite another to see his deeds and the deeds of his saints on a daily basis, knowing that the world exists because of the power of the imperial creed. The exposure to clerics, priests, and pilgrims also impacts upon the worlder's life. The higher proportion of these souls than any other worlds gives them a greater veneration of the imperial creed which links all men together. Pilgrims especially offer a rare glimpse into worlds and sectors beyond a shrine worlder's home, and a taste of the Imperium beyond told from the lips of those who have traveled far distances just to visit these shrines. Each reflects the diversity of the imperial creed, with every world worshipping the emperor in its own manner, and so pilgrims might incorporate all manners of unique rituals and other clothing as part of their native practices. Some might wear elaborate masks, allowing none but the Sun Emperor to gaze on their face. Others might wear boots and gloves filled with burrs and thorns, the better to know the emperor's lament for his people. Conflicts are not uncommon between the groups who perhaps have for the first time witnessed other ways to worship the emperor. Sects that insist on drab colors might clash with those displaying garish hues. For example, shrine worlds can vary greatly in the size and shape they take. Just as the saints and the holy men of the Imperium take many forms, so too do the places that touch the worlds upon which they rest. There is no established norm for a shrine world, only that it was the place where a saint was entombed or committed some great deed, worthy of the attention of the Ministorum. A shrine world might have been a pharaoh or hive world with a well-established society before the coming of the saint, changing the focus of its citizens and bringing attention from off-world. Equally many shrine worlds were only outposts or dead worlds before a saint fought a final battle or came there to find his final rest. The trappings of the world coming later as priests and pilgrims set about constructing a society to honor the memory of the saint. In both cases, the presence of the saints and the millions of pilgrims who make the trek have changed the world forever, given it a new purpose and a new place within the Imperium. There is another side to a shrine world, a side that hides beneath the veneer of religion and masks another face of the Imperium. While the world exists for the glory of the saint and as a part to worship the might of the emperor, the constant flow of pilgrims and visitors makes such places a breeding ground for criminals and smugglers, either selling false relics to the faithful or using the pilgrim's trail to transport illicit goods. The underbelly of the shrine world is as active and dangerous as any underhive. Many born on a planet dedicated to a saint are drawn into the shadow world, either aiding such illegal endeavors to make some more coin, or seeing it as a chance to escape in an effort to go off-world and make their own fortune. Even so, while some succeed and go on to find life on the fringes of the Imperium among vile company, they remain shrine worlders at heart, never forgetting the teachings of their saints, whether they live by them or not. A hive world is the most populous type of imperial planet, of which there are approximately 32,380, currently cataloged by the Administratum in the Imperium of Man. The population of these planets are so great that the people live in huge urban systems called hive cities, truly immense, self-contained, many-layered structures that reach high into the sky, each housing billions of individuals. Hive worlds often provide much-needed industrial labor, their manufactorums producing mountains of war material and other goods to meet the imperial tithes demand. Most hive worlds started out as a relatively hospitable place to live, but would become severely polluted, the areas outside the hives reduced to ash wastes or radioactive deserts by the never-ceasing industry of the great cities. Equally dangerous can be the hives themselves. The crime-ridden, poverty-stricken areas, almost always found in the most populated and decrepit lower levels of the underhive, are home to violent gangs, criminals, and assorted scum, as well as mutants and heretical cults, who hide there from the authorities. It has been said that the sacrifice of over 1 million Imperial soldiers is worth one day's Hive world production in weapons and armor. The population of any given world approximately doubles every 100 years, with each hive housing between 10 to 100 billion people, and 5 to 20 hives per planet. The sheer number of Imperial citizens on the Hive world is staggering, and each of those citizens is a potential soldier for the Emperor's already uncountable vast army. Hives manufacture far more than mere steel and silica. They are vast factories for the most useful possible resources, people. Almost every recruit into the Imperial Guard from the Hive world will already know how to handle a weapon. Hive worlds also serve to populate newly discovered planets. Imperial citizens are gathered from various Hive worlds, willingly or unwilling, by the Administratum, and shipped off to distant colonies, first discovered by the Adeptus Mechanicus explorator fleets. In common with most Imperial worlds, Hive worlds are often based on a very obvious class system, with a ruling noble class and a bureaucratic middle class, although with a population so tightly packed there always develops a lower working class that often fuels violent street gangs. As can be expected, the upper classes are situated in the affluent upper areas of the Hive cities, while the middle class are situated in the middle areas, and the working class are packed together in lower areas. The very bottom sections of the Hive city, the underhive, are often areas where the underclass and criminals are sent to be forgotten about and anarchy rules. Some extensively developed Hive worlds do not even consist of various enclosed arcologies, surrounded by wasteland, jungles, ice, or plains. These Hive worlds are completely urbanized and stacked with hundreds of layers of city, covering the entirety of the planet, effectively becoming one huge hive. Terra is an example of this type of super hive world. The average hive worlder lives out his life never seeing the sky, never knowing what the surface of his world looks like, and often never even leaving the city level on which he was born. Hive worlders are often born into a house or family with their vocation decided. They work endlessly at their task in the factorums and industrial hubs of their hive, producing goods to be shipped off-world, or maintaining the many systems of the hive so that its population might continue to survive and another generation be born to take their place. Nearly everything within a hive is recycled and reused, and few things are ever wasted. The air a hive worlder breathes, the water he drinks, the food he eats, likely has all passed through the bodies of countless others, endlessly restored to be consumed once again. When a hive worlder dies, his duty to the hive and house are not done, and most hives reconstitute their dead for the resources they can provide. All of the hive worlder's possessions, from the hab room in which he lives to the clothes on his back, likewise come from those before him, the dead gifting the living with what little they have in a continual cycle of hive life. Even in a system where the bulk of hive residents must settle on what meager resources can be divided amongst 1 billion hungry mouths and shivering bodies, there remains a definite division of class, from the spires of the hive tops, where the highborn enjoy the wealth of the Imperium, down through the heads of the guilds and houses that can still hope to live in relative comfort, to the workers, where resources become less abundant. The lower in a hive, the more decay and dangerous it becomes, billions drifting down to rust among the filth far below. The rule of law breaks down in the depths, where there is no system to govern what pitiful resources remain. These are wild and deadly domains, where some hivers come to escape the rigid structure of their lives, but usually find only death and despair among the mutants and violent gangs that lurk in these dark worlds. That any civilization is 3 meals away from anarchy is a very well-known saying that has held true since long before the Imperium, and applies doubly in the case of a hive world. In any given hive, millions must live together in close proximity, utterly dependent on a complex and gargantuan infrastructure for the mere basics of daily life, such as food, power, light, and even clean air. If widespread rioting, unrest, or serious disorder is allowed to ferment, it is possible that the threads binding the hive together may be broken, and millions may suffer as a result. It is said by some that this is one reason why the phenomenon of the underhive is allowed to exist in some form or another on most hive worlds as a vital sinkhole for the city's malice, sin, and discourse. Despite uneasing vigilance and totalitarian control, catastrophic unrest does sometimes occur in even the most tightly ordered of hives, and the history of the Calyx sector is littered with such calamities. Fenx World's infamous Tyburn food tax riots saw Volg's population almost double inside a year, before natural attrition reduced it again in the following few months, while the 2-decade-long period of petty revolts and near civil anarchy, caused by the misrule of House Koba on Malif, left nearly billions dead and saw the final ruination of what had been once a most powerful noble family in the sector. Even in more recent times, the mighty and prosperous Hive Sibelius has not proved to be immune, when heavy-handed Magisterum tactics stirred up a hornet's nest of trouble during what came to be known as the Reinhold Blackouts. Open warfare broke out between the Magisterum and criminal gangs, spilling out from the slums and no-go zones into the Hive's infrastructure. Power was cut to several dozen middle hive districts for days. Fear and anarchy took hold, and tens of thousands died, with whole regions gutted by raging fires. Many sections of the hive, damaged by the blackouts, remain as burnt-out ruins, collapsing into the underhive. They are now the haunts of dregs and worse. Also, as a consequence of the rioting and thanks to their loss of faith, the perceived failure, the Silius Magisterum has become even more brutal in the execution of their duties. Another notable imperial world is a mining world. A mining world is an imperial planet rich in one or more of the raw strategic material required by the Imperium's manufactorums and forge worlds. The people of the mining worlds are likely to be slaves or penal workers of the Adeptus Arbites, who live out their lives mining and transporting massive quantities of metallic ore, rock, mineral, frozen gases, or some other useful strategic or precious substance. Mining worlds tend to be rather inhospitable places, and many do not even possess breathable atmosphere, though a few many support a greater variety of life, developed cities, and even hive cities. Similar to the mining worlds, an industrial world is a type of planet of the Imperium of Man, whose surface is devoted wholly to manufacturing or heavy mining. These worlds have surprisingly spare populations in relation to hive worlds or forge worlds, as most of the labor is done using machines and other forms of advanced automation. Those industrial worlds whose primary function is mining and refining are usually blessed with an unusual abundant reserve of highly strategic minerals in order to justify the expense of the investment in technology, labor, and other resources. Another world seen in the Imperium is a cemetery world. A cemetery world is an imperial planet where large areas of the planet's surface have been given over to care for the remains of the honored imperial dead and are also administered by the ecclesiarchy, just like shrine worlds. Cemetery worlds may mark the site of a massive battle, or they may be covered in gigantic mausoleums, each dedicated to a particular imperial noble family. In contrast, some rare cemetery worlds may be covered in fields of endless, modest burial plots containing the remains of the inhabitants of a nearby hive world. Not all worlds are assigned a purpose. A civilized world, also called a developing world, is a planet whose development has been allowed to progress over a millennia, naturally without any specific purpose to fulfill. These worlds are generally self-sufficient in terms of food supply and have varying manufacturing technologies and industrial capabilities. Civilized worlds are split into geographical areas with widely varying levels of technological advancement and culture, depending on the prevailing government. These might be countries, states, power blocks, or tribal homelands. It may be the case that a higher level of technology and wealth are concentrated around the original human colonization site. Other planets in this class might exhibit gross variations in culture due to their environment, with areas weak in natural resources being similarly weak in terms of military power, economic muscle, and so on. Some planets preserve a great divide due to ancient tribal taboos, religious notions, or plain old-fashioned habits. A great many worlds of the Imperium of Man fit into this broad category, but no two are alike in the way they realize their development. By Imperial Planetary Classification Guidelines, a civilized world is one that has a population from about 15 million all the way up to 10 trillion people and pay moderately high imperial tithes. It may have large, sprawling urban areas, but none have yet reached the level of population density or self-sufficiency to be considered a true hive city. Many imperial worlds may be equivalent in culture and population levels to Old Earth during the Age of Progress in the early 3rd millennium. Pleasure worlds, mining worlds, and some shrine worlds can be subtypes of this civilized world. The last world we will discuss is a Cardinal world. A Cardinal world is an imperial planet ruled directly by the ecclesiarchy that is completely dedicated to the worship of the god emperor according to the tenets of the imperial cult, with imperial sanctuaries, cathedrals, and temples potentially covering the entire continents. Aside from already being classified as a shrine world that is particularly important center of the ecclesiarchy power and destination for the countless pilgrims of the imperial cult, Cardinal worlds also serve as a base of operation for many orders of the Adeptus Sororitas. One example of a very important Cardinal world is Ophelia 7, whose spiritual significance to the imperial cult is second only to that of Terra. The planetary governor of a Cardinal world is always a Cardinal of the Adeptus Ministorum, who often leads the ecclesiarchy hierarchy in an entire sector of imperial space. A pleasure world, also known as a paradise world and sometimes as a garden world, is the playground of the imperial nobility. They tend to be of outstanding natural beauty, and the population of such worlds are dedicated to pampering the important imperial visitors they often receive, such as members of major noble houses, members of the Navis Nobilite, planetary governors, important ecclesiarchy officials like confessors and cardinals, imperial commanders, rogue traders, and wealthy Chartist captains. Pleasure worlds are often very cultured places, and many have huge proportions of their populace dedicated solely to producing works of art, music, or other forms of entertainment. Casino complexes, opulent restaurants, and huge ballrooms are often found on such worlds. There is a darker side to pleasure worlds, particularly those who cater to the tastes of the more depraved guests they received, and pleasure worlds often host one or more chaos cults dedicated to Slanesh, the Prince of Pleasure. Some pleasure worlds contain large developing cities and other major settlements. All pleasure worlds are considered a subset of the class of planet known as Civilized World. Garden worlds hold a unique position within the Imperium in that they are one of a few kind of planets with minimal technological development. Tithes from these planets are often lower than usual or are entirely non-existent, as many are lightly populated and may have no ready available resources. Instead, garden worlds offer the Imperium a multitude of idyllic settings, ranging from recuperative locales to private estates, in exchange for protection. They are tranquil environments, though worrisome consideration still dangles like those threads on a beautiful tapestry. Some are rumored to have been ancient terraforming experiments from the dark age of technology, and could be unstable. Others are believed to be rediscovered after abating warp storms, and so could disappear again without warning. Still more are thought to be the lost homes of alien species, and be careful, for if the Xenos return or reawaken, who knows what could happen. The vast majority of garden worlds are named for their unparalleled beauty and largely undeveloped surface. Though they have all the amenities the Imperium has to offer, they do not sacrifice the peaceful surroundings to accommodate more people. Many of these worlds are places of refuge and respite, while others are monasteries or training facilities. Regardless of their use, the basics of living engender the development of a mindset or lifestyle that supports what the world delivers. Healers develop new methods to aid the afflicted. Scholars and priests research or meditate on their texts and relics. Even some of the martial order have recognized the need for contemplation and reflection to better hone their impressive combat skills. Each of these outlooks, as well as many others, develops into a microculture that essentially becomes the commodity of the planet. Compared to the majority of other planets in the Imperium, garden worlds move at a different pace. While not necessarily slower in speed, the sense of urgency, or in some cases panic, found elsewhere rarely exists here. On most of these worlds, value is placed on being thorough and contemplative in all actions, weighing all possibilities and seeking the best from those available. Most natives have a relaxed flow to their lives, usually due to their planning and preparation. Since there is often very little internal or external conflict on these worlds, major changes in their schedule or plans seldom occurs. Though most of these planets are firmly part of the Imperium, others are privately owned or catered to by their clienteles. These worlds are often on the fringes of the lawful sector authorities and can exist outside the blessing of Terra. Those living here might hold much more relaxed views concerning imperial law, and the lifetime of dealing with the rich and powerful can hone their social skills to pre-natural levels. Though the mindset of the community determines much of their behavior, many garden world natives exude an almost eerie and unearthly sense of calm. They are for the most part methodical, but approach problem solving in a more holistic way, utilizing both hard analysis and intuition to complete their objective. They sometimes constitute some of the Imperium's finest envoys and orators, having an innate ability to put people at ease and connect with others. Garden worlders are open people and expressive, but are equally skilled at keeping their emotions under control, temporarily to achieve whatever necessary goal. They do not relish this, however, and most make a point of finding a way soon after to proceed the emotional content before it finds new and unhealthy ways to manifest. With these skill sets, garden worlders make exceptional military analysts, healers, and diplomats throughout the Imperium. The Adeptus Administrarum frequently recruits from these worlds, and though the tithes of psychers are normally low in garden worlds, the quality of the recruits from these planets ensures that very few of them escape notice from the Scholastica Psychana. The Adeptus Ministorum has also found exceptionally talented scholars and priests on these planets and often maintains permanent base to find new clergy. Rogue traders who frequent such worlds often take the finest to become part of their crews, where their skills and calm discussion can aid in negotiations. Now let's jump to a different type of world. An Agri-world is an imperial planet entirely dedicated to the production of agricultural products. Many planets in the Imperium, such as Forge worlds and Hive worlds, are completely incapable of sustaining the sheer number of people who live and work on them. To feed these people, as well as the vast armies of the Imperial Guard, many planets have been completely transformed into giant farms. Most of these planets have populations of less than 100 million people and possess only a few major cities. These farming planets, as they are known, are vital to the Imperium as a hive city. These planets are given over entirely to the production of food, which hive worlds cannot produce in sufficient quantities to keep their huge populations from starving. Many worlds have whole continents given over to livestock or fields of crops. Some agri-worlds are covered in oceans teeming with fish, and a few are far stranger. Worlds covered in edible fungus, scoured by swarms of nutritious insects, or are gas giants whose upper atmosphere layer are home to flocks of edible or egg-producing flying creatures. A few planets are used solely to provide clean water to nearby Hive worlds. Agri-worlds are sometimes ruled directly by the Adeptus Administrarum, rather than by their own local government, to help ensure that their produce is grown and harvested with maximum efficiency. Those who toil on agri-worlds provide the Imperium's countless billions of subjects one of their essential resources, food. The Adeptus Administratum classifies planets in this task, often based on their desirable climate, native livestock, or other natural factors. On other agri-worlds, artificial aspects dominate, such as sheltered hydroponic lakes, floating fields suspended in hollowed-out planetoids, or algae vats buried deep within the irradiated mountains. In all cases, their population are devoted to a single cause, feeding the Imperium. Even the slightest crop failure or livestock plague can doom other worlds to horrific starvation or collapse in Imperial warfront, thus making their often overlooked efforts vital for humanity's survival. Though agri-worlds are each devoted to growing and gathering foodstuffs for a ravenous Imperium, each is unique in the way it goes about doing this, as well as the actual item it produces and exports. Many rely on staples, as these are relatively simple to grow, store, manipulate, and process into a variety of forms for human consumption across the galaxy. Some concentrate on rarer items and delicacies that can only be produced on that planet, foods bound for the table of the connected and powerful. In time, most become renowned for certain exports, as Kalto is for Potinus rice, or Sel is for its Muxhagen. Few agri-worlders, however, share in these bounties from their cultivated fields or packed corals, and often live on discarded grains or meats unsuitable for processing. Agrarian workforces can be anchored to working a single field, often developing such devotion to their produce that new religious sects can spring up like the plants they grow. Others might continually travel the surface, following the local growing seasons to descend like attacking armies on fields ripe for harvest, and scouring the landscape to remove every morsel of grain, stock, or other edible life. More voracious than any swarm, they leave behind nothing but barren soil before marching off to eradicate the next territory. On some planets, especially where there is a strong Adeptus Mechanicus presence, laborers with bionic scythe limbs might work alongside monotask harvester servitors, while combat servitors patrol the fields and use their heavy stubbards to discourage marauding creatures. Produce fields vary in size and shape, including precisely designed fields based on ancient decrees, patterns to venerate revered saints, or wild forms based on the seasonal whims of their rulers. Some fields are not on land at all, such as plankton farms that reap the oceans, or underground fungi caverns. Other agri-worlds instead specialize in livestock creatures, from the ubiquitous groks to the unique native beasts that cannot thrive anywhere else. Like the flora, these need to be terrestrial, and could include gargantuan sea beasts larger than starships, or sky-blackening clouds of protein-rich insects. In some cases, these planets might import base fodder, or cultivate hydroponic algae and vat-grown lesh, just to feed their fauna, until the beasts are harvested. Working on an agri-world, no matter its produce, is harsh and remorseless. There are always fields to till, crops to tend, harvest to conduct, or beasts to oversee. Even in artificial pastures, algae vats must be seeded and skimmed for their precious yields in continual cycles. This subservience to natural processes breeds stronger individuals who readily apply their muscles to any problem. It is somewhat rare for them to leave their homeworld, but those who do can find many new uses across the Imperium. Agri-worlds often supply the bulk of the Imperial tithes in edible produce rather than manpower, given their relatively low population and the importance of their exports. Still, the Imperial Guard is known to draw in agri-world natives, especially in times of invasion of nearby planets. Some agri-worlders might develop an affinity for machinery after much experience working with autoscythes and harvester crawlers, and could be noticed for recruitment into the cult Mechanicus. The ecclesiarchy calls to others from their years spent intoning prayers for successful harvests. The endless tabulations of harvest output, seed usage, or other essential organizational recordings can indicate a talent perfectly suited for the Adeptus Administratum and a vital posting anywhere across the Imperium. The curse of mutation is also present, though less often confronted and eradicated. Agri-worlds with low population densities allow the afflicted to more easily hide deformities or elude watchful eyes. One of the most notable domesticated animals used on Agri-worlds is the Grox. The Grox is a large, fast, and aggressive reptilian animal, originating from the Solomon system. When the star system was absorbed into the Imperium, it was discovered that the animal possessed many useful traits, such as the ability to survive in almost any environment and to thrive on even the most indigestible food. Grox meat itself is also extremely tasty and nutritious, and nearly every single part of the beast is edible. The only drawback to the Grox is their aggressive and vicious temperament. They will usually charge any creature in sight, including other Grox. They are also large, fast, and dangerous creatures, about 5 meters long and well muscled. They are territorial and like their privacy, so attempting to herd Grox together would easily drive them into a range. The solution is to lobotomize most of the stock, while keeping the breeding animals suppressed with electropulsers wired directly into their small brains. Even with these precautions, accidents still happen, and Grox are usually kept on Agri-worlds and isolated from human settlements. And those were 40 facts on an overview of the Imperial planets and citizens of Warhammer 40K. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Now, there are detailed horrible reality series that you can check out if you jump on over to our playlist. We've talked about pleasure worlds, we've talked about water worlds, we've talked about agri worlds in depth in all of those videos, so you can find the link or you can find those videos either by searching them through our archives or just going to our playlists. We have a special playlist for that. If you guys have any suggestions for other cool daily life episodes or horrible realities episodes, please comment down below. And with that said, I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.